The rain pounded against the windshield of Henry Smith's weathered pickup truck as he spotted her, a solitary figure with her thumb out on the empty country road. Her expensive boots were caked with mud, designer jeans soaked through. What caught his attention wasn't her drenched appearance, but the weathered guitar case clutched tightly against her chest. Their eyes met briefly through the rain-streaked glass, and he felt an inexplicable connection, like he already knew her from somewhere. As he slowed to a stop, he had no idea this simple act of kindness would soon transform his failing farm into the secret sanctuary of Sophia James, the 7-time Grammy winner who'd vanished from the spotlight 3 months ago, amid rumors of burnout and controversy. She slid into the passenger seat, her face partially hidden beneath a soaked baseball cap, but there was something hauntingly familiar about her voice when she whispered, "Thank you." Henry nodded, oblivious that his humble guest bedroom would soon house one of the music industry's most sought-after talents, a woman whose albums had shaped a generation, who commanded stadiums of 80,000 fans, and who now wanted nothing more than to disappear. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and hit the subscribe button for something special tomorrow. The windshield wipers of Henry Smith's pickup truck fought a losing battle against the torrential downpour. The rhythmic squeaking provided an oddly comforting soundtrack to the otherwise silent cab as he navigated the familiar country roads of Oak Ridge County. At 32, Henry's weathered face and calloused hands spoke of a life spent working the land, specifically the 70 acres of struggling farmland he'd inherited when his father passed 3 years ago. Rain wasn't usually a source of complaint for a farmer, but today it felt like a final insult. The bank letter crumpled in his pocket contained terms he couldn't possibly meet. 6 months. That's all the time he had left to turn things around before foreclosure became inevitable. His grandfather had broken this land, his father had made it prosper, and now Henry was on the verge of losing it all. He was so deep in thought that he almost missed the figure standing on the roadside, thumb extended half-heartedly. In these parts, hitchhikers were rare. The nearest town, Millfield, was a good 20 miles away, and most folks around here knew each other well enough to call for a ride if needed. Henry slowed the truck, peering through the rain-streaked window. It was a woman, drenched to the bone despite the small backpack she'd partially unzipped and positioned over her head in a makeshift shelter. What caught his eye was the guitar case clutched protectively against her chest with her free arm. For a moment, he hesitated. He didn't know her, and these days, you couldn't be too careful. But something in her posture, a certain defeated slump to her shoulders, that resonated with his own state of mind, made the decision for him. He pulled over, leaning across to crank down the passenger window. "Need a ride?" he called over the drumming of rain on the truck's metal roof. The woman approached cautiously, her face partially obscured by a soaked baseball cap pulled low. "Just heading down the road a ways," she replied, her voice surprisingly soft, almost melodic despite its weariness. "Hop in," Henry said, reaching to clear some farm paperwork from the passenger seat. "I can take you as far as Millfield if that helps." The woman hesitated briefly before opening the door and sliding in, bringing with her the smell of rain and something else, an expensive perfume that seemed out of place with her bedraggled appearance. Up close, Henry noticed her clothing wasn't the typical rural wear. Her jeans, though mud-spattered and wet, were clearly designer, and the boots that now muddied his floor mats had probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. "Thanks," she said simply, settling the guitar case carefully between her knees. She kept her face angled slightly away, one hand absently adjusting her cap lower. "No problem," Henry replied, putting the truck in gear and pulling back onto the empty road. "I'm Henry Smith." There was a noticeable pause before she answered. "I'm Sophie James." The name tugged at something in Henry's memory, but he couldn't place it. He wasn't much for popular culture these days. Hadn't been since Julia left 3 years ago, taking their shared dreams and leaving him with a mountain of debt and a failing farm. The radio in his truck had been broken for months, and the television in his farmhouse rarely showed anything but weather forecasts and agricultural reports. "Bad day to be out walking," he observed, attempting small talk as he navigated the increasingly slick roads. Sophie gave a small, humorless laugh. "Bad few months, actually," Something in her tone discouraged further questions. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the rain, the wipers, and the occasional rumble of thunder. Through his peripheral vision, Henry noticed her relaxing marginally, her body loosening from its initial tense posture. "You a musician?" he finally asked, nodding toward the guitar case. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the handle. "Used to be," she answered softly. Henry recognized the deflection, but didn't press. Everyone had their stories, their wounds. In a small community like Oak Ridge, you learn to respect people's privacy, at least initially. "Where are you headed exactly?" he asked instead. Sophie hesitated. "I'm not entirely sure. Just needed to get away for a while. Clear my head." Henry nodded. That, at least, he could understand. "Well, not much out this way except farms, and more farms. Millfield's got a motel, though it's nothing fancy. Nowhere is hiring farmhands, is there?" The question surprised him. Her manicured hands, despite being smudged with road grime, didn't look like they'd ever seen a day of manual labor. "Farmhands? You don't strike me as the agricultural type," Henry commented, trying to keep his tone light. For the first time, she turned more fully toward him, and he caught a glimpse of striking green eyes beneath the cap brim. Maybe that's the point. Something completely different. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the cab and her face. For a split second, Henry felt a jolt of recognition, like seeing someone from a half-remembered dream. But before he could place it, thunder cracked directly overhead, so loud it made both of them jump. Simultaneously, the truck's front right tire seemed to give way, the steering wheel jerking violently in Henry's hands as they skidded toward the roadside ditch. He fought for control, managing to bring them to a stop mere inches from tipping over into the water-filled trench. "You okay?" he asked, turning to his passenger, who was bracing herself against the dashboard, knuckles white around her guitar case. She nodded, seeming more annoyed than frightened. "Just perfect," she muttered. "Exactly what I needed today." Henry sighed, pushing open his door against the driving rain. "Stay put. I'll check the damage." A quick inspection confirmed his suspicion: a completely blown tire, the rubber shredded beyond any quick fix. He trudged back to the driver's side, already soaked to the skin despite the brief examination. "Tire's done for," he reported, climbing back in and dripping all over the seat. "And of course, I realized my spare is flat. I've been meaning to fix it for weeks." Sophie closed her eyes briefly, seeming to gather patience. "So we're stuck." "Not exactly," Henry replied, wiping rain from his face. "We're about a mile from my farm. We can walk it if you're up for it. Wait out the storm there. I can drive you to town once the rain lets up, and I can get the tire fixed." She looked out at the deluge, and then down at her already soaked clothing. A small, resigned smile touched her lips. "Guess I can't get any wetter." Henry found himself returning the smile, struck by how it transformed her face. "That's the spirit." They gathered their things, Henry grabbing his jacket and the important papers from the glove compartment, Sophie slinging her backpack over one shoulder and clutching her guitar case. As they stepped out into the rain, Henry noticed how she positioned her body to shield the instrument from the worst of the downpour. "Must be special," he commented, nodding toward the case as they began trudging along the muddy roadside. Sophie's expression softened. "It is. My grandfather gave it to me when I was 13. It's been with me through everything." The walk was miserable, both of them slipping occasionally on the mud, rain pelting them mercilessly. Sophie stumbled once, and Henry instinctively caught her elbow to steady her. She tensed at the contact but managed a quick, "Thanks," before continuing on. After what seemed much longer than a mile, the weathered white farmhouse came into view, sitting atop a gentle rise with fields spreading out behind it. A large red barn stood off to one side, and several outbuildings were scattered across the property. It wasn't much compared to some of the more prosperous farms in the county, but it was home. "It's not fancy," Henry found himself saying as they approached, suddenly self-conscious about the peeling paint and sagging porch step. "It's perfect," Sophie replied, and something in her voice made him think she actually meant it. Inside, the house was modest, but clean, a living room with well-worn furniture, a kitchen with outdated appliances, and a narrow staircase leading to the second floor. Henry immediately grabbed towels from the linen closet, handing one to Sophie. "Bathroom's upstairs if you want to get cleaned up," he offered. "I might have some old clothes of my ex-wife's that could fit you while yours dry." Something subtle shifted in Sophie's expression at the mention of an ex-wife, a slight relaxation as if she'd just categorized him differently. "That would be great, thanks." While Sophie showered, Henry changed into dry clothes himself, and then rummaged through the box of Julia's things he'd never gotten around to donating. He found a pair of sweatpants and an oversized flannel shirt that should work well enough. He left them outside the bathroom door with a soft knock of explanation. In the kitchen, he put on a pot of coffee and began assembling sandwiches. It was nearly lunchtime, and they could both use something warm after their drenching. As he worked, he couldn't shake the odd feeling that he should recognize his unexpected guest. Something about her was naggingly familiar. The bathroom door opened upstairs, and a few minutes later, Sophie descended, looking like a different person in the dry clothes. Without the cap, her dark hair fell in damp waves past her shoulders. Her face, cleaned of road grime, was striking high cheekbones, those remarkable green eyes, and a certain indefinable quality that seemed to command attention even when she was clearly trying to avoid it. She'd removed most of her makeup, and without it, she looked younger and somehow both more vulnerable and more authentic. She'd left the sweatpants rolled at the ankles, and the flannel shirt was knotted at her waist. She carried the guitar case, still unwilling to let it out of her sight. "Feel better?" Henry asked, sliding a mug of coffee across the counter to her. "Much," she admitted, accepting the mug gratefully. "Thank you." "Sandwich?" he offered, gesturing to his modest creation of turkey and cheese. Sophie nodded, settling onto one of the kitchen stools. "I'm starving, actually." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the sound of rain on the roof creating a cozy atmosphere despite their status as strangers. Henry couldn't help studying her when she wasn't looking. Her hands, he noticed, had calluses on the fingertips, consistent with someone who played guitar regularly and seriously. "So," she finally said, breaking the silence, "you mentioned an ex-wife." Henry nodded, unsurprised that she'd picked up on that detail. "Julia. We were married for 5 years. She left 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Sophie offered, and it sounded genuine. Henry shrugged, surprised to find the usual sting of the topic somewhat dulled. Farm life wasn't what she signed up for. Can't entirely blame her. It's not easy. Sophie's gaze traveled around the kitchen, taking in the vintage appliances and worn countertops. "You inherited the place?" "Third generation," Henry confirmed, a note of pride creeping into his voice despite everything. "Granddad bought the land in the 50s. Dad expanded it in the 80s. Now it's my turn to keep it going." He deliberately didn't mention his current financial troubles. "And is it going, I mean?" Sophie asked perceptively. Henry hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretending. "Not great. Few bad seasons, rising costs, falling crop prices, the usual farmer's lament." He forced a smile. "But I'll figure it out." Sophie nodded, seeming to understand the weight behind his casual words. She glanced toward the window where the rain continued to pour. "Doesn't look like it's letting up anytime soon." "Forecast said storms all day," Henry confirmed. "I can try to get someone to bring us a spare tire, but honestly, most folks around here will be dealing with their own weather issues today." Sophie seemed to consider this, her fingers drumming lightly on the countertop in what Henry recognized as a musician's habit playing invisible keys or strings. "Would it be imposing too much if I stayed the night? I'm happy to help out to earn my keep." The request surprised him. Most people would be eager to get to town, to a proper hotel, or at least somewhere with more amenities than his simple farmhouse. "You sure? The guest room isn't much." "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Actually, a night away from... everything sounds perfect right now." Henry studied her for a moment, curiosity growing about what exactly everything entailed, but he simply nodded. "Then you're welcome to stay, and don't worry about earning your keep. We farmers are pretty big on hospitality." A genuine smile transformed her face, creating a strange flutter in Henry's chest that he immediately tried to suppress. It had been a long time since he'd had a guest in the house, especially one so intriguing. "So," he said, clearing his throat and changing the subject, "you never said what brought you out to these parts. Not much happening around here unless you're into corn and soybeans." Sophie's expression clouded slightly. "Just needed to get lost for a while. Thought rural America was as good a place as any." She paused, then added with a small, self-deprecating smile, "Turns out I was right about getting lost, at least. I've been wandering for days." "Days? On foot?" "No," she admitted. "I had a rental car, but I left it in Springfield when I realized it might be traceable." She seemed to regret the admission immediately, her eyes flicking to Henry's face to gauge his reaction. Springfield was nearly 100 miles away. Henry raised an eyebrow, but kept his tone neutral. "Traceable? You running from something illegal?" "No," she said quickly, then sighed. "Nothing illegal. Just complications." She straightened, visibly closing the topic. "Is that your dog?" Henry turned to see his border collie, Rusty, standing in the doorway from the mudroom, eyeing the visitor warily. The dog had probably been sleeping in his usual spot in the barn, and had finally ventured out despite the rain. "That's Rusty," Henry confirmed, whistling softly. The dog trotted over, accepting a scratch behind the ears from his owner, before turning curious eyes to Sophie. To Henry's surprise, Sophie immediately slid from her stool to kneel on the floor, extending her hand palm up. "Hey there, handsome," she said softly, her voice taking on a warm, coaxing tone that seemed instantly effective. Rusty approached cautiously, sniffed her hand, and then pushed his head against it, demanding proper attention. "Well," Henry said, genuinely impressed, "you've made a friend for life there. He's usually more standoffish with strangers." Sophie smiled, rubbing the dog's ears with obvious delight. "I've always connected better with animals than people." Something about the way she said it made Henry think there was a much deeper story behind the simple statement. As if on cue, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the kitchen into the gray dimness of the stormy afternoon. "Perfect," Henry muttered. "Power outages are pretty common out here during storms. Generator should kick in for the essentials." As if responding to his words, a dull hum sounded from outside, and a moment later, minimal lighting returned just enough to illuminate the main areas of the house. "Generator won't power everything," Henry explained. "Just the fridge, some lights, the well pump for water." Sophie nodded, still petting Rusty, who had settled contentedly at her feet. "I don't mind. Actually, it's kind of nice atmospheric." She glanced toward her guitar case, which she'd propped against the counter. "Perfect weather for music, actually." Henry followed her gaze, curiosity piqued. "Do you perform? Professionally, I mean?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "I used to," she answered carefully. "Taking a break now. Would you play something?" Henry asked, then immediately backtracked. "Sorry, musicians probably hate being put on the spot like that." Sophie looked at the case with an expression that mingled longing and hesitation. "Actually, I haven't played for anyone in a while." She seemed to be weighing something internally before coming to a decision. "But I'd like to, if you don't mind an unplugged session." "I'd be honored," Henry said sincerely. They moved to the living room, where the afternoon gloom was softened by the warm glow of a battery-powered lamp. Sophie carefully opened the guitar case, revealing a beautiful acoustic guitar that even Henry, with his limited musical knowledge, could tell was exceptional. The wood gleamed with age and care, and small mother-of-pearl inlays decorated the neck. "That's beautiful," he commented, as she lifted it reverently. "Martin Det 28, she said, running her fingers lovingly over the wood. "They don't make them quite like this anymore." She positioned it in her lap, adjusted the tuning with practiced ease, and then paused, her fingers hovering over the strings. "Any requests?" Henry shook his head. "Whatever moves you." Sophie nodded and began to play, her fingers dancing across the strings with effortless skill. The melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful, something original, Henry guessed, judging by the personal emotion evident in her expression as she played. There were no lyrics at first, just the pure voice of the instrument filling the room with warmth that seemed to push back against the storm outside. Henry found himself transfixed, not just by the music, but by the transformation in Sophie herself. Gone was the guarded, weary traveler. In her place was an artist completely in her element, radiating a quiet confidence and deep connection to the music. Her eyes had drifted closed, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. And then she began to sing. The voice that filled the room was unlike anything Henry had ever heard in person. Rich, powerful, with a range and control that spoke of years of professional training and natural talent in equal measure. The lyrics spoke of loss, of searching, of the weariness that comes from running without knowing what you're running toward. As the final notes faded, Sophie opened her eyes, seeming almost surprised to find herself in Henry's living room, as if the music had transported her elsewhere. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the air between them charged with something indefinable. That was... Henry struggled to find adequate words. Incredible doesn't begin to cover it. Sophie's cheeks colored slightly with the compliment. Thank you. It's been a while since I played just for the joy of it. That song's it one of yours? She nodded. Something I've been working on. It's not finished yet. It's beautiful, Henry said simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, you're not just taking a break from performing, are you? You're hiding from something. The directness of his observation clearly caught her off guard. She carefully set the guitar back in its case before answering. What makes you say that? The rental car you abandoned because it was traceable. The way you keep your face hidden. How you tense up whenever a car passes on the road. Henry shrugged. I'm not completely oblivious. Sophie regarded him for a long moment, seeming to make a calculation. Finally, she sighed. Yes, I'm hiding, but not from anything dangerous or illegal. Just from expectations, demands, a life that stopped feeling like my own. She looked down at her hands. I just needed to disappear for a while. Henry nodded slowly. Fair enough. We all need that sometimes. He stood, recognizing her need to change the subject. I should check on the animals, make sure everything's secured for the storm. Want to come? I can show you around the place. Relief crossed her features at his easy acceptance of her partial explanation. I'd like that. Despite the continuing rain, they ventured out to the barn, Sophie borrowing a spare raincoat that hung by the door. The large structure housed Henry's small herd of dairy cows, currently seeking shelter from the elements. This is the profitable part of the operation, such as it is, Henry explained as they walked through the center aisle, warm animal smells enveloping them. Milk gets picked up every other day. It's not much compared to the big operations, but it's steady income. Sophie approached one of the gentle Jersey cows, who regarded her with liquid brown eyes. She's beautiful, she commented, tentatively reaching out to stroke the animal's nose. I grew up in the city. Never been this close to a cow before. That's Marigold, Henry said. One of our best producers. The tour continued through the barn, then quickly through the equipment shed where Henry kept his ancient tractor and various implements. By the time they dashed back to the house, even with raincoats, they were both damp again. Sorry, Henry apologized as they shook off in the mudroom. Not the best day for a farm tour. Are you kidding? That was fascinating, Sophie said, and her enthusiasm seemed genuine. I've spent my whole life in cities or on, well, traveling. This is completely new to me. The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly. The power remained out, but the generator provided enough electricity for basic needs. They talked easily about neutral topics books they'd read, places they'd traveled, though Sophie was notably vague about some aspects of her journeys, movies they'd enjoyed. Henry found her easy to talk to, with a quick wit and genuine interest in his responses. As evening approached, Henry prepared a simple dinner on the gas stove pasta, with a sauce made from tomatoes he'd grown and canned the previous summer. The domesticity of the scene struck him as they sat at the kitchen table. The warm glow of candles added more for atmosphere than necessity, casting soft shadows. It had been years since he'd shared a meal like this with anyone other than occasional visits from neighboring farmers. This is delicious, Sophie commented, twirling pasta around her fork. You're a man of many talents, Henry Smith. Necessity, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. When you live alone, you either learn to cook or eat very poorly. I lived surrounded by people who could get me any food I wanted at any hour, Sophie said, a note of bitterness creeping into her voice. And somehow, I was still always eating alone. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as him, and she quickly redirected. Tell me about your crops. What do you grow here besides feed for the cows? Henry allowed the change of subject, describing his rotation of corn, soybeans, and hay. As they continued talking, the storm intensified outside, rain lashing against the windows, and thunder rumbling continuously. During a particularly loud crash, Sophie jumped slightly, her hand instinctively reaching for her pocket before stopping halfway. Checking for your phone? Henry guessed. She nodded ruefully. Force of habit, though I actually got rid of it well, my regular one. Too easy to track. You must be someone important if people are that determined to find you, Henry observed mildly. Sophie picked at her food, avoiding his eyes. Not important, just recognizable. Before Henry could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, and a loud crack sounded from outside, followed by the thud of something heavy hitting the ground. That didn't sound good, Henry said, rising from his chair and moving to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could make out the shape of a large branch that had broken from the old oak tree and now lay across his driveway. Well, looks like we're definitely not going anywhere tonight. Tree branches blocking the drive. Sophie joined him at the window, standing close enough that he could smell the subtle scent of his own soap on her skin. Will it damage anything? Doesn't look like it, but I'll need to clear it tomorrow once the storm passes. He turned to face her, suddenly very aware of their proximity. Guess you're stuck with me for the night, like it or not. Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or calculation. There are worse places to be stranded, she finally said with a small smile. After dinner, they returned to the living room. The temperature had dropped with the storm, and Henry built a fire in the old stone fireplace. The crackling flames soon added their warm glow to the dim battery-powered lamps. More music? Henry asked hopefully, as Sophie settled on the couch, tucking her legs beneath her. She smiled but shook her head. Maybe later. It's your turn now. Tell me something real about yourself, Henry Smith. Something beyond being a third-generation farmer with a failing business. The directness of the question caught him off guard. That's pretty much the headline, he admitted, poking at the fire. Not much more to tell. I don't believe that, Sophie countered gently. Everyone has depths. Henry remained silent for a long moment, watching the flames dance. I never wanted to be a farmer, he finally said, the admission coming out more easily than he'd expected. Always dreamed of being an architect. Used to sketch building designs instead of paying attention in high school. Even got accepted to college for it. What happened? Dad got sick my senior year. Cancer. We couldn't afford to hire enough help, and someone had to keep the place running while Mom took care of him. Henry shrugged. By the time he passed 2 years later, I'd missed my window. Life moved on. Do you regret it? Sophie asked softly. Henry considered the question carefully. Sometimes. But he was my dad. What else could I have done? Sophie nodded, understanding in her eyes. Family expectations can be overwhelming. Is that what you're running from? Family expectations? She gave a humorless laugh. Among other things. My parents pushed me into music from the time I could hold an instrument. Don't get me wrong, I love it. It's part of who I am. But sometimes, I wonder what I might have chosen for myself if I'd had the chance. What would you have chosen? Sophie looked genuinely surprised by the question, as if no one had ever asked her that before. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe teaching. I've always loved working with kids. The conversation flowed easily after that, both of them sharing pieces of themselves that felt significant without Sophie revealing anything that might confirm her identity. As the night deepened, Henry found himself increasingly drawn to this mysterious woman, not just her beauty or talent, but her perspective, her resilience, the way she listened as if his words truly mattered. Eventually, the long day caught up with them. Henry showed Sophie to the guest room, a simple space with a double bed, dresser, and window overlooking the eastern fields. Bathrooms across the hall, he explained, setting down a stack of clean towels. I'm just down at the end if you need anything. Thank you, Sophie said sincerely. Not just for the room, for everything today. For not asking too many questions. Everyone deserves space to breathe, Henry replied simply. Sleep well, Sophie. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. Henry, my name, it's not really Sophie. It's Sophia. Sophia James. He turned back, the name clicking into place along with the nagging familiarity of her face and voice. Sophia James, 7-time Grammy winner. One of the most famous singer-songwriters in the world, who had mysteriously canceled her world tour 3 months ago and disappeared from public view amid swirling rumors of exhaustion, creative differences with her record label, and a dramatic split from her equally famous producer boyfriend. I thought you looked familiar, Henry admitted, the pieces falling into place. But I figured no way would someone like you be hitchhiking in the middle of nowhere. Sophia's shoulders tensed. Does it change things? Knowing who I am? Henry considered the question seriously. Should it? For most people it does. They stop seeing me and start seeing some idea they have of Sophia James, superstar. The bitterness in her voice suggested this was a long-standing frustration. Well, Henry said thoughtfully, the Sophia I met today likes my dog, makes terrible puns, knows surprisingly little about cows, and plays guitar like it's an extension of her soul. That's the one I'm interested in knowing. He offered a reassuring smile. Your secret's safe with me. Relief washed over her face. Thank you, she whispered. Good night, Henry. Good night, Sophia. As he walked to his own room, Henry reflected on the strange turn his day had taken. Of all the outcomes he might have predicted when he spotted a hitchhiker in the rain, sheltering a world-famous musician had definitely not been among them. He fell asleep to the sound of the rain against the roof, and the lingering memory of Sophia's music filling his home with a warmth that had lacked for far too long. Morning arrived with clearing skies and the familiar chorus of birdsong. Henry rose early as always, checking on the animals before returning to the kitchen to start coffee. To his surprise, Sophia was already there, staring out the window at the rain-washed landscape, a mug in her hands. You're up early? He commented, helping himself to coffee from the pot she'd apparently made. Never really adjusted to normal sleep hours, she explained. Tours, recording sessions, they mess with your internal clock. Plus, the sunrise out here is incredible. She looked different this morning, more relaxed, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, Julia's borrowed clothes hanging loosely on her slender frame. The guarded expression that had marked her features yesterday had softened. Any damage from the storm? She asked. Nothing major, Henry replied. Just that branch across the driveway. I'll clear it after breakfast. Then we can head into town for that tire if you still want to go. Something like disappointment flickered across Sophia's face. Right. Of course. They prepared breakfast together, moving around the kitchen with surprising ease considering they were virtual strangers. Sophia proved adept at making pancakes, revealing that she'd learned from her grandmother during childhood summers in Vermont. The only normal part of my growing up, she added wistfully. Over breakfast, Henry found himself reluctant to bring up their inevitable parting. He'd enjoyed her company more than he cared to admit, and the prospect of returning to his solitary routine seemed suddenly less appealing than it had just a day ago. So, he finally said as they washed dishes side by side. What's your plan once we get to town? Bus to the next city? Rental car? Sophia dried a plate slowly, seeming to choose her words carefully. Actually, I've been thinking about that. You mentioned yesterday that farms around here sometimes hire seasonal help? Henry nearly dropped the glass he was rinsing. You can't be serious. Why not? She challenged, a touch defensively. Because you're Sophia James, he responded, lowering his voice despite the fact that they were completely alone. World-famous musician, multiple Grammy winner. You're not exactly farmhand material. That's exactly why it's perfect, Sophia insisted. No one would ever look for me here. I need time, Henry. Time to figure out my next move. To remember who I am outside of the spotlight. Her expression grew earnest. I'll work hard, I promise. And I can pay. Money's not an issue. Henry shook his head in disbelief. It's not about money. I'm just trying to understand why someone like you would want to stay in a place like this. There's nothing here. That's where you're wrong, Sophia countered softly. There's peace here. Space to breathe. No cameras, no fans, no executives telling me what my music should sound like, or how I should dress, or who I should be seen with. She set down the towel and faced him directly. For the first time in years, I played music yesterday just because I wanted to, not because I had to. Do you have any idea how precious that is? Henry hesitated, studying her determined expression. He couldn't deny the farm needed help, especially with planting season approaching, and something about her presence had already brought a welcome change to the empty rooms of his home. Still, the practical farmer in him couldn't help but question the arrangement. Have you ever done physical labor? Farm work isn't easy. It's long hours, dirty conditions, and a lot of repetitive tasks. I grew up performing, Sophia replied with surprising firmness. I knew about long hours and repetitive tasks. As for the dirt, she glanced down at her borrowed clothes with a small smile. I think I can handle it. Just give me a chance, Henry. 1 month. If it doesn't work out, I'll leave. No questions asked. Henry ran a hand through his hair, weighing the offer. His practical side screamed that this was madness, harboring a celebrity who was clearly running from something. But there was also something undeniably appealing about the arrangement. The farm did need help, and his finances couldn't stretch to hiring a proper farmhand right now. 1 month. He finally agreed. But we need some ground rules. First, you have to understand that the work has to get done, celebrity or not. Second, I need to know you're not in any kind of legal trouble that could come back on me. No legal trouble, Sophia confirmed quickly. My management team and label are probably frantic, but I left a letter explaining I needed time away. No one's filing missing persons reports. And the boyfriend? The one the tabloids were all over? A shadow crossed her face. Ex-boyfriend. And no, he won't be a problem either. Something in her tone made Henry wonder if there was more to that story, but he sensed now wasn't the time to push. Okay. But if you're recognized, if this brings any kind of chaos to my door. It won't, she interrupted. I haven't been recognized once since I left. Amazing what a difference no makeup, different clothes, and actual privacy can make. She smiled wryly. Besides, who would expect to find Sophia James working on a small farm in the middle of nowhere? Henry couldn't argue with that logic. All right then. Welcome to Smith Farm, I guess. Your first task is helping me clear that fallen branch. The relief and gratitude that washed over Sophia's face made something twist in Henry's chest. It was clear she'd been carrying a heavy burden for some time, and if his modest farm could provide some respite, who was he to deny her that? After changing into clothes more suitable for outdoor work, Henry found an old pair of jeans that almost fit her with a belt, and a flannel shirt she rolled up at the sleeves. They tackled the fallen branch together. To his surprise, Sophia threw herself into the work without complaint, helping to clear smaller branches while he handled the chainsaw for the larger sections. By midday, the driveway was clear, and they'd stacked the usable wood for later cutting into firewood. Sophia was dirt-smudged and sweating, but wore a genuine smile of accomplishment. Not bad for your first farm chore, Henry acknowledged as they headed back to the house for lunch. I'll be sore tomorrow, she admitted, flexing her hands. But it feels good. Honest work, tangible results. In my world, success is measured in streams and chart positions and social media engagement, all these abstract numbers. This is refreshingly concrete. Over the next few days, a routine began to establish itself. Henry showed Sophia the basics of farm operations, feeding routines for the animals, machinery maintenance, and other daily tasks. He was surprised by how quickly she picked things up, approaching each new challenge with determination and genuine interest. For her part, Sophia seemed to revel in the physical demands of farm life. She rose early without complaint, worked alongside Henry throughout the day, and often spent evenings playing her guitar on the porch as the sun set over the fields. The simple pleasures of farm life, fresh eggs from the chickens, vegetables from the early spring garden, the rhythmic calm of milking the cows, appeared to provide her with a satisfaction that had been missing from her glamorous but demanding career. A week into her stay, they made a necessary trip to Millfield for supplies. Sophia was visibly tense as they drove into the small town, pulling a baseball cap low over her eyes and wrapping a scarf around her neck despite the mild weather. "Relax," Henry told her as they parked outside the general store. "No one's going to recognize you here. Most folks in Millfield wouldn't know a Sophia James song if it hit them in the face." "You'd be surprised," she muttered, but followed him into the store with only slight hesitation. Inside, Henry gathered the items on his list while Sophia trailed behind, taking in the charming old-fashioned atmosphere of the store with its wooden floors and glass jars of penny candy. The elderly proprietor, Dan Thompson, greeted Henry warmly. "Been a while since we've seen you in town, Henry," he commented, eyeing Sophia curiously. "This your new farmhand I've been hearing about?" Henry shouldn't have been surprised that news had traveled. In small communities like Oak Ridge, little remained private for long. "This is Sophie," he said, using the shortened version of her name as they'd agreed. "She's helping out for a while." "Nice to meet you, young lady," Dan said, extending a weathered hand which Sophia shook with a polite smile. "Not many girls these days interested in farm work." "I'm enjoying it," Sophia replied simply. Dan rang up their purchases, continuing to make small talk. "You know, you look familiar. Have we met before?" Henry felt Sophia tense beside him, but she maintained her composure. "I don't think so. I'm not from around here." Dan mused, studying her face. "Must be thinking of someone else. You just have one of those faces, I guess. Reminds me of someone famous, but I can't place it." Once they were back in the truck, Sophia exhaled heavily. "That was close." "He didn't recognize you," Henry assured her as they pulled away from the store. "Dan's always saying that to people. Part of his small-town charm." "Still," Sophia said, removing her cap now that they were alone, "I should probably limit my trips into town." As they drove back to the farm, Henry became aware of a subtle shift in their dynamic. Over the past week, the initial awkwardness of strangers forced together by circumstance had given way to a comfortable companionship. They worked well together, communicated easily, and had begun to develop the kind of shorthand that comes from shared experiences. More surprising was how naturally Sophia had fit into the rhythm of farm life. She approached each task with the same focus and dedication she presumably brought to her music, whether it was learning to drive the tractor with varying degrees of success, or helping Henry repair fencing in the north pasture. That evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Henry found himself studying Sophia's profile. With her hair tucked behind her ear, and her face relaxed in contentment, it was hard to reconcile this woman with the polished superstar whose face had graced magazine covers and giant billboards. "What are you thinking about so intently?" she asked, catching his gaze. "Just wondering how someone like you ends up running away from the life millions of people dream about," he admitted. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the arm of the porch swing they shared. "It's not what people think it is," she finally said. "The glamour, the adoration, it's all smoke and mirrors. Behind it is just exhaustion, constant scrutiny, never being able to make a mistake or have a bad day without it becoming headline news." She turned to face him more fully, her expression earnest. "I've been performing since I was 6 years old. Beauty pageants, talent shows, then the music competitions that got me discovered. I've never known anything else." She paused, gazing out at the darkening fields. "Do you know I've never gone grocery shopping by myself? Never pumped my own gas? Never been able to walk down a street without being stopped for photos or autographs?" The admission struck Henry as profoundly sad. "So what happened? Why now? Why run?" Sophia's expression darkened. "Marcus happened. My producer, my boyfriend, my everything, I thought." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking vulnerable. "He was controlling from the beginning, but I didn't see it. He'd critique my weight, my clothing choices. The psalms I wanted to record, always under the guise of what's best for my career. When the label started pushing for a more commercial sound for my new album, he sided with them instead of me. That must have been difficult, Henry said quietly. It was just the beginning, Sophia continued, her voice hardening. I found out he'd been manipulating my finances, taking percentages he wasn't entitled to. When I confronted him, she faltered. He got physical. Nothing that would show in photos, of course. He was too smart for that. Henry felt a surge of anger on her behalf. Did you report him? Sophia gave a humorless laugh. To who? The police? Can you imagine the media circus? Besides, he had already started a whisper campaign about me being difficult, unstable, using substances. It would have been his word against mine, and he had the entire industry on his side. So you ran, Henry concluded, understanding dawning. I executed an exit plan, she corrected. Fired my management team, secured what assets I could, wrote a letter to the label explaining I needed time away, and disappeared. No digital footprint, no credit cards, nothing traceable. She smiled faintly. Until my car broke down near Springfield and I had to ditch it. The pieces clipped into place. For Henry, her wariness, her need for anonymity, her determination to stay hidden. She wasn't just taking a creative break, she was escaping a toxic and potentially dangerous situation. He's looking for you, Henry guessed. Sophia nodded. Almost certainly. Not out of love or concern, but because I represent millions in potential earnings. Plus, I'm sure his ego is bruised. Men like Marcus don't take kindly to being walked out on. A protective instinct surged through Henry, surprising him with its intensity. Well, he's not going to find you here. And if he somehow does, he'll have to go through me first. Sophia's eyes widened slightly at his vehemence, then softened with gratitude. Thank you, she said softly. But I don't want to bring trouble to your door. This place, it's become important to me. The sincerity in her voice created a warm current between them. For a moment, Henry was acutely aware of their proximity on the porch swing, of the subtle floral scent that somehow remained distinctly hers despite her adoption of farm clothes and simple living. He cleared his throat, deliberately breaking the moment. Well, you've certainly earned your keep. That north pasture fencing would have taken me twice as long alone. Sophia accepted the shift to safer territory with a small smile. Even if I did hammer my thumb twice? Even then, Henry confirmed with a chuckle. Though I think we should stick to tasks that don't require fine motor skills until you've developed some calluses. The conversation drifted to lighter topics: plans for the next day's work, the weather forecast. A lively debate about whether Rusty the dog was deliberately leaving muddy paw prints on the clean kitchen floor or simply expressing his artistic nature, as Sophia jokingly claimed. Later that night, as Henry lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he contemplated the strange turn his life had taken. A little over a week ago, he'd been alone, facing financial ruin, and increasingly questioning whether he had the strength to keep fighting for the farm. Now he had a world-famous musician sleeping down the hall, enthusiastically learning to drive a tractor, and somehow bringing light back into spaces that had been dark for too long. It was temporary, he reminded himself firmly. Sophia would eventually return to her world of recording studios and concert halls. The farm was just a hiding place, a brief detour in her journey. Getting attached would be foolish. Still, as he drifted towards sleep, the memory of her voice filling his home with music lingered pleasantly in his mind. The next few weeks brought a rhythm to their days that felt surprisingly natural. Mornings began early with animal chores, followed by whatever tasks the farm required: equipment maintenance, field preparation for the approaching planting season, repairs to outbuildings damaged during winter, storms. Sophia proved a willing student, absorbing Henry's instruction on everything from operating the tractor to understanding soil conditions for planting. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch or in the living room, where Sophia would sometimes play her guitar, working on new songs that Henry recognized were different from her commercial work, more raw, more personal. She'd begun writing lyrics in a notebook she kept close, occasionally asking Henry's opinion on a verse or a chord progression. These are different from your usual songs, he observed one evening, as she played through a particularly moving piece about freedom and rediscovery. They're what I've always wanted to write, she admitted. But the label has expectations about what a Sophia James song should sound like. The image, the brand, it all has to align with what sells. And these wouldn't sell? Henry asked, genuinely curious. Sophia shrugged. According to Marcus and the label execs, number 2 introspective, not commercial enough. No catchy hooks for radio play. She strummed a chord pensively. Maybe they're right. But for the first time in years, I'm writing what feels honest, not what's engineered to top the charts. For what it's worth, Henry said sincerely, I think they're the best things I've ever heard you play. The smile she gave him in response was dazzling in its sincerity. That means more than you know. As the days passed, Henry found himself increasingly drawn to this version of Sophia, the one without the glamour and the carefully crafted public persona. She was funny, thoughtful, and possessed a genuine curiosity about farm life that went beyond merely passing time and hiding. She asked intelligent questions about crop rotation, sustainable farming practices, and the economic challenges facing small family farms like his. You could turn this around, you know, she said one afternoon as they sat at the kitchen table reviewing his financial records, a task Henry had been surprised to find Sophia quite knowledgeable about. The dairy operation is solid, but you're losing money on these conventional crops. Have you considered specialty markets, organic certification, direct farm-to-table partnerships with restaurants? Henry blinked at her in surprise. Where did you learn about all that? Sophia smiled wryly. I may be a musician, but I've had to learn a lot about business to avoid being completely taken advantage of. Plus, I read a lot. When you spend most of your life on tour buses and in hotel rooms, books become your companions. Together, they began exploring options Henry had previously dismissed as impractical for a farm his size. Sophia's outside perspective and business acumen revealed possibilities he hadn't considered. More than once, he found himself wondering what Julia would think of these changes and, realizing with a start, that he cared less about that answer than he once would have. Nearly 3 weeks into Sophia's stay, they made another trip to Millfield for supplies. This time, she seemed more relaxed about venturing into town, though she still wore her signature baseball cap and kept her head down while in public. At the general store, Dan greeted them with his usual friendliness, though Henry noticed the older man studying Sophia more intently than before. You two becoming a regular fixture, Dan commented as he rang up their purchases. Nice to see Henry with some company for a change. Been too much of a lone wolf since Julia left. Sophia glanced at Henry with an unreadable expression before smiling politely at Dan. The farm keeps us busy. As they loaded supplies into the truck, Dan emerged from the store, holding a magazine. Say, I just remembered where I've seen you before, he called, approaching them. Been bothering me for weeks. Henry felt Sophia freeze beside him. He moved slightly to position himself between her and Dan, unsure what would happen next. Dan held up the magazine, a celebrity gossip publication, with a small sidebar photo of Sophia from her last public appearance before disappearing. The headline read, Where in the world is Sophia James? Star's disappearance continues to baffle fans and industry. You look just like her, Dan said, pointing to the photo, then scrutinizing Sophia's face. That singer who vanished a while back. Spitting image, I tell you. Sophia's face remained impressively neutral. So I've been told, she replied calmly. Not the first time someone's mentioned the resemblance. Dan seemed to accept this, nodding. Must be strange, looking like someone famous. Bet you get that all the time. It has its moments, Sophia agreed with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As they drove away, Henry could feel the tension radiating from her. That was close, he said, echoing her words from their previous trip to town. Too close, Sophia replied, her voice tight. If Dan made the connection, others might too. Maybe I should think about moving on. The suggestion created an unexpected hollow feeling in Henry's chest. Is that what you want? He asked carefully, keeping his eyes on the road. Sophia didn't answer immediately, staring out the window at the passing countryside. No, she finally admitted. But I can't risk bringing trouble to you. If Marcus finds me, let me worry about that, Henry interrupted, surprising himself with his vehemence. Sophia turned to look at him directly. This isn't your battle, Henry. Maybe I want it to be, he replied simply. The words hung between them, laden with implications neither was quite ready to address. Sophia's expression softened, a mix of gratitude and something deeper that made Henry's heart beat faster. Let's not make any decisions today, she finally said. We've got spring planting to focus on. Henry nodded, grateful for the practical redirect, even as he registered the "we" in her statement. Somehow, in just a few weeks, his struggling farm had become their shared concern. The knowledge was both comforting and terrifying. The next day brought the first real stretch of warm spring weather, perfect for beginning the planting they'd been preparing for. As they worked side by side in the fields, Henry found himself watching Sophia when she wasn't looking the way she pushed her hair back with a dirt-smudged hand. The focused determination in her eyes as she learned to operate the seed drill, the easy way she now moved through farm tasks that had once been foreign to her. You're staring, she observed during a water break, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Henry felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the warm day. Just making sure you're operating that equipment correctly, he countered, attempting to sound like the teacher rather than a man increasingly aware of feelings he had no business developing. Sophia's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled, but she let it pass without comment. How much more do we need to plant today? At this rate, we should finish the north field by sundown, Henry replied, grateful for the shift to practical matters. You're catching on faster than I expected. High praise from the taskmaster, she teased, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Maybe I've found my second calling. Famous musician and part-time farmer? That would certainly give the tabloids something to talk about. The moment the words left his mouth, Henry regretted them. Sophia's expression clouded briefly, the reminder of her other life clearly unwelcome in this moment of simple work and companionship. Sorry, he said quickly. That was thoughtless. Sophia shook her head, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. No, you're right. This is just temporary. A break from reality. Not a new life. Henry wanted to argue that point, to suggest that perhaps this could be more than temporary, that the connection growing between them deserved exploration, but caution held him back. She was Sophia James, international superstar with a life and career that existed on an entirely different plane from his. Whatever she might be finding on his modest farm was likely just a novelty, a respite before returning to her real world. They finished the day's planting in a comfortable if slightly subdued rhythm, and by the time they headed back to the house, both were physically exhausted but satisfied with their progress. As had become their routine, they took turns showering away the day's grime before preparing dinner together. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk, Sophia broke the companionable silence. I got an email today, she said quietly. First time I've checked the burner account I set up before leaving. Henry turned to look at her, concern immediate. Bad news? My lawyers have been tracking Marcus's movements, she continued, her voice carefully controlled. Apparently, he's been making inquiries in Springfield. He might have traced the rental car. A protective surge rose in Henry's chest. He has no way of knowing where you went from there. No, Sophia agreed, but it means he's not giving up. And he's getting closer. She looked down at her hands no longer perfectly manicured, now bearing calluses and small nicks from farm work. Maybe it's time I stop hiding and start fighting back. What does that mean exactly? Sophia took a deep breath. I've been documenting everything, the financial manipulation, the emotional abuse, the threats. My lawyers have built a case, but they need me to come forward, to formalize complaints, possibly testify. That sounds like the right move, Henry said cautiously, sensing there was more she wasn't saying. It would mean going back, Sophia clarified, finally meeting his eyes. Back to Los Angeles, back to the spotlight, back to being Sophia James, instead of just Sophie who helps around the farm and plays guitar on the porch at sunset. The implications were clear. Their shared routine, The easy companionship, the growing connection between them all would end. Reality would reassert itself, with all its complications and separations. "I see," Henry said simply, because what else could he say? He had always known this was temporary, had reminded himself of that fact repeatedly over the past weeks. Yet the prospect of her leaving created an ache he hadn't anticipated. "I don't want to go," Sophia admitted softly, surprising him. "These weeks here, they've meant more to me than I can explain. I found parts of myself I thought were lost forever." Henry swallowed against the tightness in his throat. "The farm will still be here," he offered, knowing it wasn't really the farm she was talking about. "If you ever need to disappear again." Sophia's smile was tinged with sadness. "And what about the farmer? Will he still be here too?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken feelings that had been building since the day she arrived. Henry found himself at a crossroads: play it safe and keep things light, or acknowledge the truth they'd both been dancing around. "I'm not going anywhere," he said finally, choosing honesty. "And if you wanted to come back, for whatever reason or length of time, I'd be glad of it." Sophia held his gaze, something vulnerable and hopeful in her expression. "Just glad?" Henry took a deep breath. "No," he admitted, "not just glad. These past weeks with you have been— I don't know how to describe it except to say that this place feels like a home again, not just a farm I'm fighting to save." He hadn't planned to say so much, but once started, the words seemed to flow of their own accord. "I know this isn't your world. I know you have a life to get back to, fame, fortune, millions of fans. But I think what we found here is real, and rare, and worth acknowledging at least." Sophia's eyes shimmered with emotion in the fading light. "I thought it was just me," she whispered, "feeling like I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." The distance between them on the porch swing seemed suddenly vast and unbearable. Henry hesitated only briefly before reaching out to take her hand. Her fingers curled around his immediately, the simple contact sending warmth through his entire body. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Sophia admitted. "I need to deal with Marcus, to protect myself and my career. But after that—" She squeezed his hand gently. "I don't want this to be goodbye, Henry." "Then it won't be," he said with more certainty than he felt. "We'll figure it out." They sat in silence for a long moment, hands still joined, each lost in thoughts of possibilities and complications. Finally, Sophia stood, gently tugging on his hand. "Come on," she said softly. "I want to show you something." Curious, Henry followed her into the house and to the guest room that had become hers. On the bed lay several handwritten pages of music and lyrics, the psalms she'd been working on during her stay. "I've been writing an album," she explained, gathering the papers. "Not the commercial pop my label expects, but something real. Something that matters to me." She handed him the top sheet. "This one is about you. About this place. About finding peace when you least expect it." Henry scanned the lyrics, his chest tightening with emotion as he recognized their story woven through the verses: the rainstorm, the taking in of a stranger, the unexpected connection that had bloomed between them. The chorus spoke of sanctuary found in unlikely places, and the freedom that comes from being truly seen for who you are. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But won't your label reject it? You said they want commercial hits." Sophia's expression hardened with determination. "Let them try. Part of reclaiming my life is reclaiming my art. I'm done letting others dictate my creative vision." She took the paper from his hands, setting it aside before looking up at him with newfound resolution. "I've been hiding here, Henry, but I've also been healing. Finding my voice, again, my real voice. And when I go back, I'm going as this version of myself. The one who knows how to fix a fence and plant corn and connect with what actually matters." The conviction in her voice stirred something in Henry: pride, admiration, and a deeper emotion he wasn't quite ready to name. Without thinking, he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Sophia leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. The moments stretched between them, years of solitude and guardedness, dissolving in the warm current of connection that had been building for weeks. It was impossible to say who moved first. One moment they were standing apart, the next they were in each other's arms, lips meeting in a kiss that felt simultaneously like a beginning and a culmination. Henry's hands cradled her face with gentle reverence, while Sophia's arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Sophia rested her forehead against his. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," she admitted with a small smile. "Me too," Henry confessed. "But I kept telling myself it was crazy. You're Sophia James, and I'm just—" "Don't," she interrupted, placing a finger against his lips. "Don't diminish what you are. What we've found here isn't about fame or status or any of that nonsense. It's about two people connecting in a real way. That's rare, Henry. Rarer than hit songs or Grammy Awards. Believe me." Henry kissed her again, amazed at how natural it felt, how right. Whatever complications tomorrow might bring, this moment was perfect in its simplicity and truth. They spent the evening talking, planning, and occasionally kissing, discussing possibilities for the future that neither had dared consider before. Eventually, exhaustion from the day's physical labor caught up with them, and they fell asleep side by side on Sophia's bed, fully clothed, her head resting on his chest and his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. Morning brought not just sunlight, but clarity. Over breakfast, they outlined a plan. Sophia would contact her lawyers to move forward with the case against Marcus. She would need to return to Los Angeles soon, but only temporarily to handle legal matters and begin negotiations with her label regarding her new musical direction. "And then?" Henry asked, trying to keep his tone casual despite the weight of the question. Sophia reached across the table to take his hand. "And then I come back here, if you'll have me. Not for Avery, still have a career I love when it's on my terms. But this place, it's become home in a way nowhere else has been. You're proposing a commuter relationship between rural Iowa and Los Angeles?" Henry asked with a raised eyebrow, though his heart was racing at her words. "I'm proposing we figure it out," Sophia replied simply. "I don't want to choose between my music and what we've found here. I think I can have both if we're willing to make it work." The solution wasn't perfect there. Would be separations, scheduling complexities, the inevitable intrusion of her fame once people discovered their relationship. But looking at Sophia across his kitchen table, determination and hope shining in her eyes, Henry knew he would accept whatever complications came with loving her. "We'll figure it out," he agreed, squeezing her hand. Later that day, as they walked the property together, discussing which fields would be harvested first and what improvements could be made to the dairy operation, Henry felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from his life for too long. The farm that had felt like a Berdana failing legacy he was destined to lose suddenly represented opportunity and future. "You know," he said, stopping to look out over the fields that stretched before them, green shoots already breaking through the soil they'd planted days earlier. "My grandfather used to say that farming is an act of faith. You plant seeds in the ground and trust they'll grow, even when you can't see what's happening beneath the surface." Sophia slipped her arm through his, leaning against his shoulder. "Sounds a lot like relationships," she observed with a smile. "And music too, for that matter. You start with something small and nurture it, never quite sure what it will become." They stood together, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western horizon, painting the farm in golden light. Tomorrow would bring challenges: the legal battle with Marcus, negotiations with the record label, the inevitable media frenzy when Sophia James reappeared with a new album and a farmer boyfriend. But today, in this moment, there was just the two of them and the quiet certainty that sometimes the most extraordinary things happen in the most ordinary places. A chance encounter on a rainy day had led to something neither could have anticipated, but both now recognized as precious beyond measure. "Play for me?" Henry asked softly as they turned back toward the house, the day's last light following them home. Sophia smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and spoke of peace found and battles yet to be fought, but with someone steady by her side. "Always," she promised, and in that simple word lay all the commitment either of them needed. Inside, as twilight gathered, Sophia took up her grandfather's guitar and began to play. The music filled the old farmhouse with warmth and possibility, notes of hope and resilience, of love found in unexpected places, of two souls connecting across worlds that should never have intersected but somehow did. Outside, a passing car slowed briefly, perhaps drawn by the sound of music drifting through the open windows. But finding nothing remarkable about the weathered farmhouse, with its sagging porch step and peeling paint, it continued on, unaware that within those simple walls, a Grammy-winning legend and a struggling farmer had found something far more valuable than fame or fortune. They had found home in each other. And that, they both knew, was worth fighting for.